I'm gonna romance this elf. Unplayable. Persona Central confirmed on their interview with Studio Zero that there won't be any romance in Metaphor ReFantazio. And just when we have a party full of attractive characters, they pull the plug. I thought this game was meant to be fantasy, and yet they won't let us fantasize of dating this adorable bunny girl? How dare they! But Metaphor doesn't really need to depend on having romanceable partners. In fact, they will create a better story and character development without the dating simulation. Here's the reason why Metaphor won't have romance. Before that though, if you're kinda bummed that we won't be able to date anyone in Metaphor, then like this video and join Ataka Define for more JRPG content.
I'd like it if you had eyes for me. And only me.
It is understandable that fans are upset that Metaphor won't have any romance, especially when this game was created by the trio that made the Persona series so successful. And it's a given that the dating simulation in Persona games is one of the factors for its huge success. So despite that, why didn't they bring that mechanic in Metaphor? The first possible reason is that the story will have a canon romance plot. It won't be the first time for fantasy JRPG games to have a romance subplot, and most of the games that went in that direction created one of the most wholesome couples. Think of Alphen and Shion from Tales of Arise. The romance plot heavily impacted their growth and story, with Shion finally finding someone who isn't afraid of her and breaking her loneliness, while Alphen discovered his purpose, someone who had no identity given meaning. And this is not the only example, as there are other great games out there with canon romantic plots. So it's possible that we'll see the protagonist with a canon love interest. It may be Hulkenberg, it can be a bromance with Stroll, but it should never be this girl. However, it does seem like the protagonist isn't even interested in dating. And that's another reason why the game won't have a romantic subplot. The protagonist is more dedicated to his goal to save the prince and take the crown. Throughout the trailers, we see the protagonist campaigning for what he believes in, the peace in uniting all races. So the protagonist cannot show any hint of favoritism towards a specific race, because it will cause tension and divide people. How would the fairies feel if he suddenly chose to date an elf? They would think that as king, he will now indulge the elf race more than the others. Instead, the protagonist will marry the crown itself to serve the people, without any hint of favoritism towards any race. The protagonist lives to fulfill his purpose, unlike a teenager chasing skirts. Because time and time again, this is not a Persona game, so it won't have the same slice of life mechanics. While granted, Metaphor does have their own downtime with the Gauntlet Runner, where you can bond with other characters and do some leisure activities. However, it doesn't erase the fact that this game puts a heavier emphasis on dark fantasy, where the story takes place in a world on the verge of war over the throne. Inserting a dating simulation would break the momentum and feel of the game, since most of the characters are also occupied with the king's trial. Now, given that Metaphor won't have any romance, will it still be a good game? Yes. Metaphor doesn't need to rely on dating sims that made the Persona game so popular, since it can now break away from it and tell a more flexible story without being bound by romantic subplots. Instead of the characters falling in love with the protagonist, they will instead admire his determination in the king's trial. As the trailers have said, throughout the campaign, the protagonist will form bonds with different races, becoming his loyal followers. Think of One Piece. Won't it be weird if we suddenly get a romantic subplot with Luffy and Robin? It's strange because we know Luffy isn't that kind of character, and the same goes for the protagonist. They're both determined to reach their dreams and see their friends more as family. It's also similar for both Robin and Hulkenberg. They follow Luffy and the protagonist because they admire their actions. It will not sit right if they suddenly fell in love because they got saved by them. Instead, they feel accepted for who they are. And that is the type of atmosphere that Metaphor is setting. It doesn't need to have a romance plot to prove how important the bonds we have for the characters that we will meet in the story. In fact, these characters would even grow better without the protagonist dating them. This will be a spoiler for Persona 3, so if you haven't finished it, just skip to this part. In Persona 3, we don't have any social links for the male party members. And if you're playing as Femc in P3P, Junpei is the only party mate you can't romance. and that's because he has a canon partner. And Junpei's relationship with Chidori is what developed him as a complete character, not his relationship with Makoto nor Kotone. His heroic moments and his persona fusing with Chidori is one of the most awesome scenes in the whole Persona series. And that's the reason why fans often reference Junpei as one of the most developed characters in Persona. Not only that, but character development won't be lacked in the social links mechanic. So Metaphor will be able to tell a story for the characters without relying heavily on the romantic relationships. I'm not saying that romance is a negative for games, because honestly I was bummed out when I learned we can't romance anyone in the game. But I paused for a moment and thought, hey, I bet they're cooking something good. And this is what I can think of while musing the possibilities. Well, the game will come out on October 11, so despite not having romance, are you still excited for Metaphor? Let me know in the comments. I also did a video about everything that got me excited for Metaphor, so I hope you'll check that video out. Like and subscribe to Otaku Define for more Metaphor content. This is Math, and stay awesome my dudes.
A land grotesque as its people,